Hi guys, and welcome back to another IbraCorp video. Super excited for this video today. I know I've led onto it for a few days now, and I'm happy that you're here to watch it with us. It's been an absolute pleasure to get this video going for you guys. We've been working really hard with our team and some of our community members to bring this one to you today, so I really hope you enjoy it. It's been a bit cryptic, it's been a bit secretive, but hopefully today it'll pay off. Just quickly, before we get stuck into it, I'd like to thank all of my subscribers and all of those who are liking our videos and those who are supporting us financially by signing up with a membership on our website, ibracorp.io. I really can't thank you enough for your support. It's really helped me and our team work harder to get more content out to you, and really appreciate everything you guys do for us. To help somebody else financially is a really big thing, and I don't take it for granted. Everything we do here is all thanks to you, and I do it for you. So thank you very much to everyone who has supported the channel right from the beginning. Just subscribing to the channel is the minimum that I can ever ask for anybody. So thank you very much for doing that. And anything you provide on top is of course greatly appreciated. So you've waited long enough, it's time to finally tell you what today's video is all about. Today, we're going to be discussing putting Unraid in a virtual machine. And some of you might be wondering, what's the benefit of having Unraid in a virtual machine? Well, there's a few points that I think would really benefit people to be able to get Unraid going in a virtual machine. One of those points is testing plugins, Docker containers, and other changes without risk to your root host system. As most of you know, Unraid lives off a USB stick, so most of the time you have to have a USB, apply a trial account, and then get the USB launched on a bare metal system. And not everybody has a spare computer laying around to do that, or spare USBs to do it with. Now fundamentally, Unraid always requires a fresh USB in order to get a fresh license applied. So we're not going to be showing you how to circumvent anything in that sense. You still need a fresh USB with a valid GUID so that Unraid can validate it. But generally, it's easier to get a USB than it is to get a whole computer for you to test with. Another benefit is testing Unraid versions. As you know, when Unraid releases versions, especially those as release candidates, some things may break. And in order to save yourself the hassle of fixing your host system, you can then actually trial that upgrade on a virtual machine and see how you like it, see what changes have been put in place, and what you might need to look out for when you finally decide to upgrade your main host. This includes the upcoming 6.10. The reason why we haven't covered the 6.10 release candidates is because there's enough content out there already, those provided by Unraid especially. What we're going to provide you is a platform for you to actually test those changes yourself without having to worry about reading all the change logs if you don't want to. You can upgrade your virtual machine and then go from there. Another point might be that you want to use our Cloudflare Argo Tunnel and Tailscale videos to help build a complete independent setup. Being able to do that in a virtual machine means, again, you're not putting your host system at risk, and you can have that networking setup and concept design in a virtual machine first, and then apply it to your host network later. What about adding drives? You might want to add drives, remove drives, make changes to your parity, manage your disaster recovery plan, and any other sort of disk operation without fear of actually losing anything. These are just some of the points that I think you guys will really enjoy out of having an Unraid virtual machine. The whole idea originally with virtual machines is that you can set up a lab, and that's something that hasn't been touched with Unraid before. So what we're providing you today is an opportunity to set up your own lab, create a lab and have Unraid VM on its own subnet, have Windows VMs inside of that, maybe even point subdomains at it. Perhaps you want to try out pfSense. You don't want to mess with your existing setup. These are all the benefits that you could have by having Unraid as a virtual machine. In fact, you can even pass through raw physical drives and graphics cards. For example, if you wanted to test Jellyfin or Plex and have the graphics card pass straight through, you can do that as well. In fact, you can have as many as you like, as long as you have fresh USBs to do it. So if that sounds interesting to you guys, and you're pretty keen on the idea, stick with us and let me show you why you might want to try it out. Alright guys, so thanks for sticking with us. I hope you're going to enjoy this video. So let's get stuck into it. Now, if you are not aware, we obviously have our docs website up and running. It's been going for a few weeks now and it's been working really well. We've had some fantastic feedback from the community about it. And today is no exception. This documentation has been in progress for several weeks and it's been sitting in our docs under private status for long enough. So when this video gets released, the documentation will also be released for you too. You can find it at docs.ibracorp.io. The link will also be put down in the description for you. Before we get started, there are some thanks and some credits that need to go out for people who deserve it and acknowledgements for helping us get to this point. First and foremost, our writer DiscDuck. He basically wrote this guide and tested it over the last few months and has brought it to the status in which you see now. His hard work has definitely paid off and we really appreciate all the effort he's put into this. So thank you DiscDuck for your work on this project, we really appreciate it. Our alpha testers, myself and Hawks, so we were the first to put the documentation through its paces and see whether it measures up and what we can and can't do with it. We then opened up a new concept in the IbraCorp community on Discord, which is to have the Ibra Beta team. These are members of the community who have put their hand up to offer assistance after we asked people to list their names for any interest. Those members are Dick Insider, Old Crazy Eye, P. Chernigovsky, Scorp732. These guys have contributed out of their own time in their day to help us test and follow the documentation in secret and to help iron out any potential issues before we release the video to the rest of you guys. So a big thank you to our beta team, we really appreciate all your help and all your feedback. It's been really fun rolling out this sort of concept idea of having people test before we release the video. And it helps us get some of that feedback from the community that we normally only get after a video goes up. And finally, a big thank you to LJM42 from LimeTech. Now LJM42 is one of the lead developers at Unraid, and he actually wrote a guide similar to this a long time ago. And with his permission, he has allowed us to take that guide and build on it so that there was other things that we can do that wasn't in the original guide. So a big thank you to LJM42, we really appreciate your cooperation and that of LimeTech. It's been a pleasure to work with you guys and we hope to work with you guys again in the future. Alright guys, so we're just about ready to start getting into the video. There are some housekeeping that I'm going to do with you first. These are the prerequisites, they're here in the guide and they'll always be up to date. Currently, this guide is using Unraid version 6.9.2, which is, as of today, the latest stable version at the time of writing. You're going to need an Unraid server with HVM and IOMMU enabled. And you can verify that by clicking the small icon here in your Unraid server, and it will tell you whether HVM is enabled or IOMMU is enabled. If either of those are disabled, check your BIOS. Usually these things have names such as Intel VTD or VTX, and they may need to be enabled first. Once you make sure that those items are enabled, you can then continue with the guide. You're going to need a PC with either Windows, Mac or Linux to help prepare the USB. Obviously you're going to need a spare USB stick to install Unraid onto. We're also going to need a Unraid license for the virtual Unraid server. A trial license will work and we'll show you how to do that today. You'll also need a decent editor such as Notepad++, or if you want to use Visual Studio, that will work as well. And perhaps the most important thing on this entire page, if you were to take anything from this guide, guys, this is the main part that you need to understand. There is high risk of danger. You may lose data if you do not take backups, including your USB flash drive. You need to follow our instructions exactly as directed. Even if in my video I skew from this guide is the Bible. So please make sure that we're following it exactly as directed. Unraid will not react very well with two USB drives which might have the same name. So it can and will cause serious unprecedented issues. Now, during our beta testing, we found that some users may have skipped a small step that can be really critical. So make sure you don't skip anything. Read every line twice. Make sure you're covering yourself. To be honest with you, the risk is actually very low from my own experience. However, if you miss a step, the risk becomes very, very high. So as it says, we've tested this procedure and confirmed it works for us as well as the beta team. However, it is technically experimental and we aren't responsible or liable for any damage that might occur. So with all that housekeeping done, we can actually get started. As a small utility that might help you as you're reading the guide, There's a lot of things that we have to copy and paste. Now in the guide, we have these put in code blocks that you can simply copy it exactly as it is. So when you get to these fields like this one, all you have to do is click and you can copy what's in there. That just helps avoid any extra spaces or anything like that. So guys, we're ready to go. At this point, I'm gonna move the guide over to my other screen and I'm gonna have a nice clean screen ready for us to start with the process. So if you'd like to follow along with the documentation, feel free to have that alongside and we'll get going. So the first thing you're going to need to do is format your USB stick. So plug your USB stick into whatever system you're running and we need to format it. So on Windows, this is the process. We go to my computer, go to the USB, right click and click on format. In the screen, we're going to give it a label and we're actually just going to call it Unraid VM. Now you don't have to call it this, but I recommend you do it for the first time you follow through the guide because everything in the guide references this name. So it's just going to make it easier for you later. Just keep in mind that you don't want to use the same name twice. So if you decide to do this later, try and pick a different name so that everything is separate. And you don't want to name it the name of your host Unraid. All these settings look fine. We want to make sure we're on FAT32, click format and click start. Once that's done, we have a fresh USB ready to go. The next step is to download Unraid so that we can put it onto our USB stick. Now we're not going to use the USB creator because that does a couple of things that we don't want. So what you need to do is on the page that's linked in the guide, scroll down and you'll get to the downloads here. In these downloads, download the latest stable release, which in this case is 6.9.2. Now that we're in the downloads folder, we can see our zip file there with the Unraid server files inside of it. So what we need to do is extract that. So if you don't have WinRAR, might have WinZip, whatever the case might be, usually you can just right click and go to extract to, and with using the built-in WinZip, something similar. So we'll just extract that, and now we have the folder that's inside and all the raw files. At this point, copy all the contents inside the folder and paste it into your USB stick. Once you've pasted all the content, we're going to rename this EFI folder by removing the hyphen at the end. So now we need to make sure that our Unraid virtual server has a different name than that of the host that we're going to be plugging it into. That's just in case your host is still called Tower, which is the default name given to a new Unraid server. So to do that, go into the config folder and right click ident.cfg and edit it in your editor. Again, we're using Notepad++ here because it's just a bit easier to see things in the correct format. As you can see here in the name field, it's got Tower there. So we're just going to call that Unraid VM as it shows in the guide. And in my case, I'm just going to add a 2 there. Once you're done here, click save, go back to our files, go back to the main folder and go into syslinux. In here, you're going to find syslinux.cfg. Again, we're going to edit that. And in this file, everywhere that you see the word append, to the right of that, we're going to add this. Unraid label equals Unraid VM, which is the name that we've given it in the first one. So make sure it matches whatever you put here. Unraid label equals the VM name. So as you can see, we have an append there. So we're going to put it here, here, and here. So in this file at the moment, there's 4 points that we've just put that in. And we click save. As an added bonus, if you want to use nested virtualization, copy the section that's labeled optional in the documentation. And on this line here, line 8, after the BZ root, we just paste that there. So kvm_intel.nested equals 1. Go ahead and click save. Now back in our root folder again, we're going to create a new file. So right click, go to new, and just select text document. We're going to call it startup.nsh. As you can see, it's going to ask if I want to change the file format. That's fine. And leave it as NSH. Now, if you don't see file extensions on Windows, just in case you don't know, go to view up the top and check the file name extensions box. So right click the file and we'll edit that in Notepad++ as well. On a single line, we'll paste what's in the documentation, which is this line here, and click save. Next, we're going to edit the makebootable.bat file. So right click that and go to edit with Notepad++. Head down to line 32, which you'll see here, which is set tag. And we're going to call that the name that we gave it at the start. So if you follow the documentation, it's just Unraid VM. In my case today, I'm just using Unraid VM 2, but make sure you're following the documentation and what it has written in there. So then go ahead and click save. We'll close out of this. And now this part is pretty important. So right click the bat that we just edited and go to run as administrator. Once you've made it bootable, it'll say completed, and then it'll ask you to press any key to continue. If we press that, that then closes it. So then all we now need to do is unplug the USB from our computer, make sure you close any open editors, and safely eject the USB. Now once you plug it into your Unraid server, make sure you restart your Unraid server. This is to make sure that the correct USB starts up on boot. What you don't want is it to be booting up the new USB that we just plugged in. If you find that it's not picking the right USB, just make sure you set it in your BIOS settings to boot from your original host USB and check that it starts up first. Once it's all started up, confirm you're in the right Unraid server, your host Unraid server, check the license, does the name in the top right look correct, all that sort of stuff. Alright guys, so once you've got your Unraid server started and you're definitely on the right server, we can now prepare the host. So head over to your app store, and the first thing we're going to install here is the USB plugin. Now the USB plugin we're going to use is the USB Manager by Simon F, so thank you Simon F for your work on this. Go ahead and click to install. Once it's done, click done. Now that we've got the USB Manager installed, we can start setting up our VM. So to set up the VM, head over to your VMs tab. If you don't see the VMs tab, go to Settings, VM Manager, and just make sure Enable VMs is yes. Once you're in the VMs tab, go ahead and click Add VM. And we're going to use the Slackware template, so just click on Slackware, click on the icon, and select the Unraid icon. Obviously we want it to look like Unraid, so why not use the Unraid icon? You can set it to auto start if you prefer, but we're just going to leave that off for now. And for the name, obviously just give it a name that you'd like. We're going to give it Unraid VM2 just to match our USB and all the things that we've been setting up so far. For the CPUs, make sure we're giving it at least 2 logical CPUs. I recommend normally you don't pick the 0.1 or the 2.3 just so that the main Unraid server always has its own resources, but it will source its own resources anyway, so feel free to pick whatever you like, but that's just what I recommend. But we want 2 logical, so not hyperthread, so we're just going to go with these 2 options here. For the initial memory, we'll give it at least 3 gigs, so 3 gig of RAM there. Choose the highest machine, so in our case it's currently Q35 5.1, which is already selected for us. For the BIOS, we're just going to leave that as OVMF. For the USB controller, we're going to leave that at 2.0. We don't need to select any of this. Now for the VDisk location, if you know what you're doing, you can change it to manual and set what you want. For example, you can select, certain disks and things like that. For the general population, I would say that auto is fine, and it tells you exactly where it's going to store that VDisk, which is typically on the domain share. So the next thing we want to do is how much VDisk size we want to give it. So let's just say 50 gig, we would put 50 and then capital G. For the VDisk type, we're going to select RAW. For the VDisk bus, we're going to select SATA. For the VDisk type, you have 2 options. You have RAW and you have QCOW2. Now for your knowledge, RAW basically means if you have the space and want to get the highest speed, go for that one, because it will allocate the entire amount of space at once, and then you don't have to load it doesn't have to grow as you use it. If you use QCOW2, it's only as big as the data stored on it, so it can grow to the maximum you specified. It's preferred for testing VMs because you don't want to allocate a whole bunch of space for no reason. You can say, look, I want you to go up to 50 gig, but if you don't need 50 gig, don't use it. Now, if you were to make that a stable VMS at a later point, and it was going to be in a live environment, maybe you want to change that. That's up to you. For the primary VDisk, we're going with SATA. Okay, so make sure you change that as well. Now, at this point, you can click the little plus here and start adding disks. So if you were to press the small little plus icon here, we could actually add more disks. Now, this is a way that you could add several disks in your Unraid VM, and that way replicate an environment where you have multiple disks, including a parity and a cache and all that sort of stuff as well. For the purpose of this VM that we're going to show you right now, we don't really need it, but I'll add another one anyway, and we'll just give that 20 gig, and I'll add another second one here, and we'll say 20 gig as well. All right, realistically, you're going to have more than 20 gig, but for the purpose of the video, the principle still applies. Now, again, making sure we change those settings that we said before. So we want QCOW2 and we want SATA. Okay, we're happy with all that. That looks good. Change the top one here to QCOW2 as well, and that way they're all matching. Now we can pretty much leave all this stuff here in the graphics settings. For the network bridge, that's really up to you. By default, it is BR0, which is your bridge network. So I will just leave that as is. If it's not, I would recommend you probably change it just so that you can get to it a little easier. Now you'll notice the USB stick that we used to actually attach to the service. Now we're not going to use that, so make sure you do not check it here. And I'll show you why we're not going to check it here. Uncheck start VM after creation. We don't want to start it just yet. We just want to create the template. So once you're done, go ahead and click create, unchecking that box. Okay, so we have a VM sitting there waiting to go. So we pretty much have one final step and we're pretty much ready to start up the server. Go to the USB tab, which you'll find at the top here next to main. This is the USB manager that we installed from the App Store. And you're going to see a couple of things here. Now the ones with this small little red icon is basically the USB we're using for our host Unraid server. And so it won't let you do anything with that because it knows that that's the host. Whereas this one here is our VM one that we made earlier. And with this one we have a couple of options. So if we click on the small little USB icon here on the left, here's what gives us our port mappings. So what we can do is toggle the auto connect at VM start. So that way, whenever the VM starts up, it just attaches this USB straight off the bat and allows us to boot from it, because obviously Unraid requires to boot from the USB. Then under virtual machine, we pick the VM that we just created. Once you've done that, click done. Guess what, guys? We're pretty much ready to start it up. So let's go over to VMs, left click our VM here and click start. And that's pretty much it, guys. If you managed to get this far, you've got a VM running now inside of Unraid. And one final plot twist for you, well, this machine itself is a virtual machine inside Unraid. A VM that actually lives on Pumbaa. As you can see, we can see our CPUs that we've passed through to our first VM. And if we go to main, there's our disks that we've passed through as well. We've even set one as a parity disk. I say that in quotation marks, of course. But that's potentially what it could look like for you, and you could have multiple VMs running off of them, just like I am here. So I've got another VM running inside of this VM. And if we go back out, it's actually running on Pumbaa. So in here, let's say for example, you wanted to update to the newest OS and try it out in here before you hop over and put it on your main server. You can do that. Here we go, 6.10 RC1. We can go ahead and click install, try it out, see if we like it, with no harm to our host machine. I hope you guys enjoyed that. It was really fun making it and building it over the last few weeks with the community. Thank you again to all of our testers, all of our writers, and the general community who have been following us and cheering us on to get this one out there for you. I hope you enjoyed it, and we can't wait to see you in the next YibraCorp video.